Hello and welcome to Business on the Wire. The protest amongst the farming community continues on the outskirts of India's national capital region, even as multiple meetings have not yielded a clear outcome so far. There have been already several points around this debate, both for and against the three laws that we're talking about, but in particular, there seem to be some questions in contention. One, is this only a protest from farmers in Punjab? Two, are we only talking about large farmers? And three, of course, the entire debate about MSPs and who stands to benefit and whether or not that is a safety net that can be removed from under the feet of the farming community across India. Joining me to talk about some of those crucial points of discussion is noted economist Prem Shankar Jha. Thank you, Mr. Jha, for joining in and speaking with me. As we stand, there is still an impasse that exists between the farmers and the government. And it looks like there are 2 or 3 points of contention that have at least got the most attention from the media's point of view. I know you've studied this in great detail, which is why I want to go through it step by step. Just addressing some of these core concerns around what the farmers' protest is around. The first one, sir, seems to be largely circling around the MSP issue, something the farmers have said they would like to be guaranteed, whether it is a private or a public arrangement. And there seems to be some discrepancy amongst economists and economy readers on what percentage of farmers do get benefits from the MSP. Now, given the data that you've studied and read, what is it that you found seemed to be the more accurate figure?
Well, in a recent interview that Wire did, Mr. Karan Thapar did for the Wire with Ashok Gulati, the well-known economist, and Ms. Khera, there was a disagreement. Mr. Gulati said that only 6% of all farmers benefit from the MSP, and Ms. Khera said that it was more like 15%. I've studied these figures carefully, and there's no doubt in my mind whatever that Ms. Khera's got the right figure, because first of all, as she pointed out, the survey that Mr. Gulati was referring to, the 2012-2013 survey. I went to
clarify for our viewers, Mr. Jha, you're talking about the NSSO situation assessment survey, and this data was from 2012 to 2013. Please go ahead.
That's right. If there is a way of getting much more precise, more recent data. If you look at the annual survey of employment that is being done now, and the one for 2018-19 gives you the following figures. It shows that there are many tables, so I'm not going to go through the details of. You have to actually go through them very carefully. But what it boils down to is that in 178 million rural households in India, about 65 million are agricultural self-employed. Now, agricultural self-employed is a subcategory of self-employed, and agricultural self-employed can only mean farmers. Now, if you take that into account, and then you look at the figures for various states, you find that just Punjab and Haryana alone have 7% of all the farmers, as defined in this way, and then but not by any means the only states that from where procurement takes place. In fact, they account for about 45% of the total procurement. 45, I think it's just under 50. The rest of it comes from the various other states in smaller amounts, but a very large amount comes from Madhya Pradesh. So, and Madhya Pradesh is directly the product of the success of the UPA's attempt to widen the scope of procurement of essential goods, notably rice and wheat, on the basis of, in order to meet their Right to Food Act commitments. And Madhya Pradesh now actually produces, I'll just give you the figure here. I have it just on one of these pages. Yes, Madhya Pradesh gives us now a total of 24 million tons of rice and wheat. In fact, they give more than Punjab. And this is an outstanding success. Now, if you take these figures and you take also something that Mr. Gulati said, that only 65% of the procurement is done from Punjab and Haryana, you find that that the figure is at least 15 million, maybe even more farmers have been benefiting, and certainly not only in Punjab and Haryana.
Mr.
I
Jha,
might add, there's one other small benefit. It's a clandestine benefit.
yeah.
Farmers from UP and Bihar, which have not got good MSP, they did not implement it at all. They have been selling their rice to traders from Punjab and Haryana uh, at often as little as 60% of the MSP, because that is even better than the price that they're getting in the entire broken down marketing system. So the contrast is very important. If the MSP has supported the income of farmers, where it has not been there, they have been very badly damaged. Now, this finding was also a finding of a Center for Advanced Studies on India, University of Philadelphia study, which has just come out, which says exactly this, that where there was limited procurement, which meant that if, after taking X amount of food from there was no more MSP, the big farmers jumped in first and got the benefit. But I'll come to that in a moment.
I'm going
That's
to pause here just to, sort of ask you some sub questions to the points you've raised. I'll go point by point, Mr. Jha. The first one is that, so, are you contesting the point that Professor Gulati is making on grounds that it is dated information or that it is not nuanced enough information? And the second thing I'd like for you to explain to people watching this is, as we understand it now, 23 crops are covered by the MSP. When you're talking about Madhya Pradesh, are we only looking at wheat and paddy when we're trying to break up this pie? What are the other crops across India that do get the benefit of MSP? And when you talk about the wheat and paddy pie, are you then saying that Madhya Pradesh is actually getting the bulk of the benefit of any MSP payments, not Punjab?
No, that's you got two or three questions together there. So I'm going to try and if I can remember them, I'll answer them, because I do
And
not
remind.
remember all of them. No, first and foremost, the on the, you asked me a question about the data,
Yeah.
and you said, is it because it's out of date? It's both out of date, and there is much more precise data available today, which Mr. Gulati has not looked at, which is what I said from the periodic survey of I think it's employment or livelihood or whatever it is that comes out every year. Now, therefore, and if you look at that, then the 15% figure is much closer. But the point is, they're missing the MSP is not something that is restricting farmers or limit, the whole mandi system, APMC, MSP, that combine is not cheating farmers. Mr. Gulati also went on to say earlier that there's an implicit tax of 14% on farmers. That means they could have earned 14% more if they had been in the free market. The question is not whether they would or would not have earned 14% more, but who would have earned the 4% more, 14% more. The whole point about MSP is that the bulk of the benefit is going to smaller and medium farmers. In Punjab, for example, most of the big farmers, there are 58,000 large farmers with about 15.77 hectares of land average each. Most of these people are in citrus and cotton now. Also paddy and thing, but it is 673,000 farm families, which is more than just one farmer, who are in only rice and paddy double cropping, and for them the MSP is absolutely crucial for maintaining their standard of living. So it is not the big farmers. This is the second question that Gulati and Khera have disagreed. It's not only the big farmers who benefited from MSP. It is actually not the big farmers who don't need it. The real division is between those who have the power to dictate some that term to the market, and those who do not. The MSP protects those who do not have the power to dictate to the market. By definition, the big farmers do.
So,
And what the present reforms will do is to increase that power of the big farmers at the expense of the small farmers.
yeah. So we are going to get to this point on, small versus big in more detail as well, Mr. Jha, particularly in terms of, who the protesters represent. But I'm just going back to the first part of our conversation, which is the fact that there are 23 crops that are covered by MSP.
Oh, yeah.
Why this
Okay.
fascination with wheat and paddy only? And when we talk about wheat and paddy, which state is it that is actually benefiting from the safety net of the MSP the most?
The 23 crop MSP, I think we have to distinguish between minimum sale prices that were put by state governments and minimum sale prices that have been put essentially by the center. The centers is a very long-standing thing, which starts way back from in the times when when India was a food deficit country and was importing to survive. Ship to mouth is what we were in the late 60s or up to 1971. So at that point in time, the rice and wheat were the most important things. And it was to promote their production, and the fact that the Green Revolution was in fact doing precisely that the minimum sale price system came up. It was then expanded vastly by the last UPA government. And as I said, not every state has benefited from it, certainly not in the north. But in the north, one state has done very well, and that's Madhya Pradesh, and we must notice this. Okay, so it's the MSP is a protective system for medium and small farmers, not the marginal farmers. I'll come to that later. And so it is just not right to say this. Then we come to the question of the other, what are the other 21 crops? The only other crop where an MSP is important is sugarcane. Okay. Because we produce 350 million tons of sugarcane. The bulk of it is produced in UP. And UP does try to enforce an MSP on sugarcane. I beg your pardon, I must add one thing. Rice, wheat, and coarse grains. These are the ones that the center has an interest in. They put the MSPs on. So there's a state and a center MSP. The state is interested only so far, really only in sugarcane, and that mainly in UP, but also Maharashtra and Karnataka and Tamil Nadu. These are the 4 states that do the maximum sugarcane production. So MSP is, you can say 23. The rest are just not, nobody bothers about them, And in Punjab, and where it's not implemented, you don't even get the benefit that the Punjab and Haryana farmers get. But why are we punishing the farmers and punishing the states that have been efficient in taking an action which will protect the farmers? Actually, the marginal farmers have gone into horticulture, most of them a long time ago. That's the last question that I want to talk about. But leaving them aside, the small and medium farmers, why is the protection of these farmers who don't have much market power a crime? This is the way that Mr. Gulati is looking at it.
Which leads us to the second part of this debate, Mr. Jha, which is whether or not these farmers are primarily from Punjab and Haryana, because that's what the farmer protest is now being at least identified as, that it's a Punjab farmer protest. And in reaction to in defense of that statement, people have pointed out that there are now 18 states that allow private markets outside the APMC. There's 19 states that permit the direct purchase of agricultural produce from farmers. So in essence, this is already in place, and it's only the Punjab farmers who have a problem with that. Would you agree with that statement? And if not, how would you corroborate, what your view might be?
First, it's not correct. As I pointed out, Punjab, Haryana, and Madhya Pradesh are the 3 states which contribute 60, this last year, 2019 and 2020, they contributed 60 million tons out of the 85 million tons that were procured by the Food Corporation of India. Now, they have been able to do this because they've been efficient in this process. If you give protection to the farmers who have a very complex thing, look at them. Vast majority of these people do grow both paddy and wheat. They have only 4 weeks after cutting the paddy to plant the wheat. They must get seed, they must get fertilizers, they must get threshing machines, they must then after paddy particularly, break up the heavy tractors to break up the soil. All that has to be done. They have to pay for each of these services. The only people who give them money in advance for this are the Aratyas. The linkage, and this the Kazi study, the Philadelphia University study, is very clearly pointed out that there's a linkage between 7 different operations that the farmers have to perform, all in a very short period of time, in which this middleman, the Arhatya, actually is very, very vital. So, in a sense, even if he is making money out of it, he's not in there as philanthropy. It is something the farmer considers to be well worth his while, because otherwise, time plus standing in line at banks begging for loans, which you may or may not get. If you don't get the loan in time, you can't put your crop in. So the whole system is a very efficient and complex system, which is what the Philadelphia study points out. And everybody who's writing on agriculture today is not a farmer. That's one of our problems. They're all macros. They throw data at your face. They don't look at what's happening on the ground. They don't see the complex interconnection in the most difficult area. Remember, farming is far more complex than even manufacture of automobiles. Because every facet of manufacture of industry is controllable, but farmers can't control the weather.
Which brings me back to the question, Mr. Jha. Why is it that we are associating the farmer protest only with Punjab? Is it that it has not been able to unify itself, across the country, or is it that we are not being able to see this, outside of the Punjab prism that perhaps national media is presenting it as?
Just look at where the procurement comes from. It is coming from Punjab, Haryana, Madhya Pradesh, as I said, 60 out of 85 million tons, the total procurement. So it is in fact a problem of states which are efficient in agriculture and are therefore producing more than their domestic needs, and therefore are most vulnerable to the forces of the market. If you are in a chronic deficit, let's take Tamil Nadu. Tamil Nadu has a few deltaic areas and a couple of rivers in the valley of which you can grow rice, and they do that. For the rest of it, it's the driest and most miserable part of the country. They have dry land farming and they make very little money out of it. So what are they going to procure? The whole of the Deccan Shield, there are eight states which are chronically in deficit. So why do you talk about MSPs there? You don't need an MSP where there's a shortage. You need an MSP only when there are surpluses. You're punishing those people who created the surpluses which feed the shortage areas by taking this off. This is the point. And it's being done for one and only one reason, is to promote contract farming and private trade.
There is another point of debate, Mr. Jha, which is around the point you were making earlier on whether or not these are large farmers or small farmers. Now, there is debate over what that Plimsoll line should be. Should it be 10 hectares or 4 hectares? There is also the sort of insinuation that those who are protesting are in fact, frankly, not farmers at all. They are the arhatyas, the middlemen, while the farmers are actually busy toiling and tilling away at their lands. How do you contest that? And how do you take on this question of size and what determines whether someone is a large farmer, whether someone is a small farmer, or indeed, as the majority of the farming population is, just working on somebody's soil and not really owning much?
As I said earlier, the real distinction between large and small farmer is not the amount of land you have. In Rajasthan, you can have vast amounts of land, 30, 40 acres, and it won't give you 1 ton of rice, or this in the desert. In Tamil Nadu or in the Kaveri Delta, You will get people with half a hectare of land who are actually able to make enough on it to live the whole year. Not very well, but they can. So the first question, therefore, is that size by itself has very little to do with this. The dividing line is between those who have market power and don't have market power. Those who are, now if you're producing a lot, then you actually lose market power. And among you, who loses it first? Those with the weakest bargaining power. Because there's excess, prices start crashing. The people who have got connections and who can come and enter into reliable contracts to sell are the ones who will get the bulk of the market. So this is why this whole business of somehow the other demonizing, by knocking out the MSP, you're knocking out the protection that has been responsible for India becoming the largest agricultural exporter in the world today. We're a poor country. 40% of our children are malnourished, but we are also the world's largest food exporting country. $60 billion last year.
Ever since this debate broke out, Mr. Jha, there have been several examples of how even developed countries such as the United States of America do have security sheets in place for their farming community. They do have some kind of mechanism in terms of, protecting price. At this point, can you readily think of any example of a nation that does not have an MSP-like system and is managing efficiently for its farmers? Is there any global example of that kind?
If you were to find those, actually, you would find them certainly not in the European Union, which is heavily protected. Certainly not in Britain, which had a different system of protection. We don't know what they'll go back to, but they'll probably go back to the old system, which is directly subsidizing farmers. But if the only areas you would probably find natural, very well, farmers doing very well are in South America. Notably Argentina, parts of Chile, Brazil, these areas. Why? Because there was huge amounts of land. There were relatively small populations. Argentina, in particular, wonderful, fertile soils. Perfect for raising cattle. The finest beef in the world for a whole century came from Argentina. So that you do not, where you have a situation, you're a small population, your domestic needs are very little, but there's a giant world market. And you are able to sell directly. So it's essentially a country of large farmers, large ranchers. And mind you, that was now there's also an urban population in Argentina which is very poor, but the agricultural situation has not changed. In India, this is not the case. And I want to come to that question when we discuss contract farming, if you have the time. But I want to tell you just how vulnerable farmers are here. The one point that has not been dealt with by Gulati and Khera much is the issue of contract farming. And yet the contract farming issue is the one that the farmers are really very upset about. Now, the reason is that the whole idea of contract farming, which has been there, and there was a bill that had already been prepared, which the states were to go okay, was intended to, and it was already there, it's been trashed, and a central bill has been brought in its place. I don't know whether you know that. I got the names, but it's too boring to read out two-line names. There was a bill that had been prepared in 2013-14 started, but in 2017 it was put up by the Modi government on the internet to invite comments from the public as well as from the state governments. Then the next step should have been a meeting of the National Development Council, and to determine just how to be implemented. But its purpose was always clear. It was to protect the small and marginal farmers. And the subtext of it was that in particular in Punjab, Haryana, and parts of all over the south, small and marginal farmers had gone into horticulture. Today, the production of fruits and vegetables in India is about 20% more Our total production of food grains is 291 million tons in 2019-20, and horticultural products is 324 million tons. So 10% more. Okay, so now but this is perishable stuff. And therefore, the contract farming was a way of bringing in the buyer right to the farmer's floor, so that he would take care, he had an interest in preserving and making sure that these very valuable products, the horticultural products, got safely to the market. Because that doesn't exist today, 30% of what the farmer produces goes waste, and is a well-known fact. It gets rots on the way, or in godowns, which are not cold storage. And the thing is, there are cold storages. India has now 150 million square cubic meters of cold storage space. They're all in the cities. There's not a single cold storage anywhere in the entire country, in the rural areas. And yet the contract farming thing, which is designed mainly to protect these people, never ever thought of cold storages. You need cold storages in the villages, and you haven't got them, which is why the contract farming bill was necessary. Now, today, it's being thrown wide open. I hope that marginal farmers will benefit from it, but I cannot be sure of it. Even if they do benefit, remember that the smallest of the cereal farmers will be very badly hit by the removal of MSP, because they will be the last people from whom people will buy. The traders will buy. Traders will go to the easiest access, biggest farmers first.
There's a couple of other areas I want to discuss, Mr. Jha. One, for you to take on some of the lines of support that have been raised for these three acts. And the other is that I want to discuss Punjab in a little more detail. But first, let me take up the arguments that support these three acts that have come into being. The first one, of course, being, citing examples like Nestle and Hatsun, where they have been buying milk from smaller milk producers, and pointing to the fact that this actually opened up the market and provided much more options and more lucrative options to the milk producers. Can that work in the context that we're discussing?
Absolutely. That was the whole point about the contract farming bill that was already up there. But the important thing was that contract farming bill was one which did not try to take away the powers of the states from them. It was a bill that it was what you call a model bill, like the electricity bill of Atal Bihari Vajpayee, which took 4 years to pass, and several meetings of the National Development Council. Now, the next step should have been that the National Development Council was called, and that contract farming bill have discussed, and then each state would have said, look, we have different sets of problems, so we can't do this, we can't do that, and a series of modified bills will have emerged, each catering to the local needs according to the socio-economic as well as the product mix that you have in each state. You now have one single thing from which only the giant traders can benefit, those who work on a national scale. This is the problem that we are facing. I have nothing against bringing in eventual buyers, but even right to the farm floor. But an even better one would be if the farmer had some way of some holding power, so he could bargain better with those buyers, and that would require the villages having cold storages of their own. Now, it's a calculated, omission that in 600,000 villages there are no cold storages. And do you know what the farmers actually get? Let me give you an example. 3 years ago, I have the data in a book I'm writing. Farmers' national average that they got was 4.46 rupees per kilo for potatoes. 4.46, and they were quite happy with this. There are years when it's gone down to 2 rupees, because it comes to the market the moment potatoes, tomatoes, onions, peas are a disaster. unless they're picked up right there on the farm floor itself. So even these less perishable of the horticultural products, the farmer gets 1/3 to well, about 1/10 of the consumer's price, But even there is about 7 stages, as Mr. Gulati said, between the farmer price and the final price. And you do want to reduce this. So here there is a great deal of scope, but it has to be done state-wise, not with one single central act.
We have an example of where the APMC was eliminated, Bihar in 2005, Mr. Jha, and the experience from there, at least in terms of reports, does not bode very well, either in terms of the farmers getting any, greater leeway in terms of setting prices, or that an alternate mechanism has, built itself successfully to replace the mandis and to replace the APMC. What are your own thoughts on that subject?
Bihar is one of those states where, in fact, very few of any state initiative, central or state, have been implemented well. I come from Bihar. My ancestral village is in North Bihar. I've been going there and back most of my life, and I know, and the people from there come, and they are the main migrants. The largest single community of migrants in the country today is from Bihar. So to point to Bihar and to say, look, MSP has not worked there, therefore it will not work anywhere else, is actually doing the opposite. You are pointing to the one state where the state did not implement a good policy, and then saying, because it failed here, it must be destroyed in the places where it is working well. Again, let me tell you this, exactly the same point has been made by the Philadelphia study, which is a very, very good study of four young people. Now, the point is, they have said that, they put it in a different way. They said where the state government has only done limited procurement, they put a ceiling, we'll procure this much and no more. The big farmers have got in first. They've got the MSP, nobody else has. Now, that's been happening in other states. And this is why actually Bihar farmers are selling their produce to Punjab traders at half to 60% of the MSP. Because even that's better than what they get if they go to their own markets. So I do not know who's telling you that Bihar has produced an alternative system which is better than the MSP. It's absolute nonsense.
Let's move to Punjab for a little bit, Mr. Jha, because that's really been the sort of center of this entire debate, and that's where people are, circling the data around. Now, one is the point that agriculture and allied sectors for Punjab grew at about 2.3% or so over the last couple of years. And this is being compared with the national standard, saying, hey, you know what, Punjab has been trailing in terms of growth in any case. There have also been allusions to the kind of subsidies that the Punjab farmers get when you talk about fertilizer, power, etc., saying these are very rich and large farmers who are bearing the benefits of these subsidies, but are unwilling to let go of any of the luxuries that come with it. And thirdly, in terms of the criticism, the fact that Punjab has been stuck in this cropping pattern for itself, wheat and paddy. They are not diversifying. They are not looking at poultry, dairy, vegetables, etc. So this is the problem that they have brought onto themselves. How would you engage?
Hold it. How many questions did you ask me at the same time? I'll forget them all. Tell you all over again.
On Punjab with these 3 points in mind.
Yeah. Which is the first one?
The first one is that the rate of growth is not as handsome as what
is stalled. Okay, fine.
Yeah.
Second?
The second is that Punjab is basically just benefiting from the luxuries of the subsidies provided to them, but doesn't want to, stand up and cough up any money when it's required. And the third,
and not diversify. In fact.
Yeah.
And they continue. Yeah. Because the real solution lies in diversification.
They're not.
Right, okay. Got it. And the third, was there a third, or just these 2 points? Thank you very much, Mitali. I was hoping you'd ask that, because in the rush I'd forgotten that these are 2 critically good, important points. First, Punjab is stalled at 2.3% in the last 2 or 3 years, but Haryana is also not much better. Do you really want to pick the last 2 or 3 years? Shall we just go back to 1967? when Punjab was responsible alone, singly, for a 70% rise in the total production of wheat of the whole of India. Punjab caused the wheat production to go up from 6 million tons in 1966-67 to 11.4 million tons in 67-68. All of that came from Punjab. So these are people who got into the Green Revolution first. I remember there was a farmer called Atwal. Atwal jumped into an IRI research field, where the new varieties, Kalyan Sona, and things were being tried out. The mixture of the Philippine red wheat, which had been originally brought, IR8, and he jumped in. He stole eight grains of wheat, and sowed them in his. He jumped over the fence, got away before they could catch him, and he sowed them. So he used that as seed, and in the next year, he had 4 times the yield, and he absolutely dazzled the rest of Punjab. Many years later, he got the Best Farmer award, but initially he started by being a crook. That's the kind of initiative that Punjab showed at that time. Haryana was not far behind, and now today you find Madhya Pradesh farmers are doing exactly the same thing. The development in the last 10 years in Madhya Pradesh has been phenomenal. They're now producing more wheat. There's more wheat being procured in Madhya Pradesh than Punjab. 1 million tons more. So it's a question, you punish people when a huge initiative that they took is exhausted. Why is it exhausted? They've grown rice and wheat. So the land is absolutely exhausted. They've been trying to get out of that into horticulture for a very long time, and dairying, Punjab. Now, typically in a Punjab village, there are 80 families, 80, 85 families, up to 90 families. 4 or 5 of them are large farmers with more than 15 hectares of land. But 23 average for the state are marginal farmers with 1.4 hectares average. These are the ones who are doing most of the cultivation of horticultural crops. Now, they needed to be helped, and the help really is cold storages. But even otherwise, the contract farming should have been done there. That does not affect the bulk of what they're doing, which is being done by 673 out of 900,000 or 950,000 farm households. They're not farm households, more than one farmer. And those 673 are entirely dependent upon the rice wheat and the safety of the safety net of the state to maintain security. It's not simply, it's not just simply the money you get, but the fact that you will get it. You don't have to fight for it. That there's an entire mechanism which will make sure that you get all the things you need for the next crop. You have 4 weeks to shift over in time. That complete mechanism is the MSP plus APMC. You take one leg out of this the whole thing will collapse.
At this point, what is your sense of what percentage we're talking about when we say large farmers in Punjab, Mr. Jha? Because that's been, people associate Punjab with large farmers, large pieces of land. Even if we go with the land description.
You see, Punjab, the definition of large, medium, small, and marginal, which is the official government thing, is different from everywhere else. And on an average, it's about 1.6 to 2 times larger each category. For example, the large farmers in Punjab start at above, I think it is 10 hectares and above. And their average holding, as I said, is 15.77 hectares. The small and medium together, each at about 300,000, are sort of between 2 hectares and 10 hectares. And the average among in these two groups together comes to 4.05 hectares. Okay. Now, if you go to Tamil Nadu, the small and marginal farmers are under 1 hectare, and the average is 0.47 hectares. 1.4 in Punjab and 0.47 in Tamil Nadu. So, of course, these definitions have got to be done by the states. There cannot be a single and a generalization. Oh, large are doing well, small are doing badly, etc. is based on pure ignorance.
There's one other point of concern that I'd like
But last point, I want to point out something.
Yeah.
The plots of land in Himachal are tiny. They're terrace farming mostly, and they're tiny. Okay, but Himachal farmers were rich 40 years ago, because the Himachal Pradesh Marketing Corporation had set up a system where throughout Himachal, they had roads wide enough so that people could go or could come with little mini tractors and bring their, what you call it, peas, tomatoes, high value fresh produce to just collection centers from where the HPMC sold them with contracts right the way across the country, where everybody was in the height of summer, and the Himachal Pradesh got very, very rich. What was the cause of it? It was total central protection. It was a centralized system. The state did it. No private system would have done this, or could have done it. And we need to remember that this is exactly what is now, the elements of it that are there as needed in 5 or 6 other surplus states where farmers are doing well. You want to destroy that, take that out.
There's one other point of concern that I'd like to raise with you, aside from the topic of MSP itself, which several, including, former chief economic advisors like Kaushik Basu have also raised, which is that this entire construct seems to have provided absolutely no risk mitigation for the farmers we're talking about.
Precisely.
I mean, have you ever seen that happen before when we talk about changing systems or dismantling systems for farmers? Has it ever been that they are left with literally no legal recourse in terms of risk mitigation?
Now, let's not go into legal recourse. There are enough risks from nature before we get to the legal system where no farmer can afford to go, full stop. Because the legal system is such that it takes 7 years to fix your thing, if minimum, and in that you've lost 14 crops. So it's just not possible, okay? So let's forget the law. When we come to risk mitigation on the ground, as I pointed out, the most important thing is an assured marketing system. The farmer will pay a price in terms of smaller, of lower realization if he is absolutely sure of it. If he doesn't have to think and worry about it, if he doesn't have to have sleepless nights, if he can plan his children's education, because he knows that this much money is going to come, or that there is somebody he can go to for a loan immediately if he needs it. So that is risk mitigation. That is true risk mitigation. And I gave you the Himachal example because it's in a difficult area, the highest level of risk mitigation by a responsible government. Now, taking away the government altogether, how do you mitigate risk? There is not one example in Indian agriculture or agriculture anywhere in the world except in Latin America where the state is not involved in risk mitigation for its farmers. Find me one country in Europe with this. Just find me one country, anywhere in Europe, that does not mitigate risk for its farmers. Even though the farmers are 4 and 6% of the population, here the farmers are 68% of your population. I mean the rural community. And the farmers are approximately half of those. In fact, 2/3 of those. And among them, the owners are at risk. But what about the workers for them? About 12% of rural population are actually got regular salaried work. Then there's about 25% who are casual. They're seasonal workers. They come in, they cut the crops, they get the money, they go. Okay. Now the point is, these people, if the farmer's capacity to pay is impaired, all of them get damaged. You already got 100 million migrant workers. How many more do you want?
One final question to you then, Mr. Jha. You've observed this space for decades now. What is your own sense of how this will resolve itself? Will the laws be repealed? Will clauses be added? Will a new law be introduced on top of these to address MSP issues in specific? Or do you think on this one, it's unlikely the central government is going to back down?
Well, I can answer this with a two-pronged way, what I hope and what I fear. What I hope is that the government will recognize that it needs to not repeal is what the farmers are using word. They are saying, look, take each of these three farm bills and let's discuss them. Let's look at them threadbare. They've hardly had even the parliamentary standing committee has not had a chance to look at them. You passed them in 3 days. September 17th, September 19th or something, 16th or 18th. Finished. Okay, so that's number one. I mean, you have totally destroyed the process of a legal enactment in the most sensitive and dangerous area of all. Dangerous to the country, dangerous to any government that is there. So that is the first thing. That you really need to go through the whole process of consultation. On the contrary, what you did was the only area in which a bill had been framed which required this process of consultation to take place, you trashed it. So let's go back to square one, which is not the same thing as saying repeal. Hold up these bills. Keep them in abeyance. Let the old system continue and let us talk about. Let us talk. Second point, I want to make a very important point here. Why is there is the motivation of the government? Where's the hurry? I'll tell you where the hurry comes from. The hurry comes from the fact that since India has become a food surplus food exporting country, billions are being made. Last year, we exported 12 million tons of rice. The average price that the rice got abroad was $594 per ton. This includes basmati and non-basmati. But non-basmati also did very well. The Food Corporation of India had given out its surplus rice to the, and it bought it also from non-APMC states. But the point is, the rice that was got by the exporters got around about 20,000 rupees per ton. And what they got out of it was 45,000 rupees per ton. $7.1 billion were made on rice alone, of which $4 billion were pure profit. Now, this is this giant apple. And it's not only happening there, it's happening with horticulture. The same kind of profits are being made, into which big business in India wants to get. Now, if they were brought in with an appropriate framework of safeguards, it would be terrific. I think that the statement by Reliance, if they're sincere, is something that we should take note of. They pointed out that these are not the things we want to do. These are the things we want to do. But you need to have a legal framework and an agreed thing, a set of rules, so that there is no temptation to renege upon these. I think that this is where we need to go. We look at each of the three bills. You realize that where the MSP is working well, leave it. Help the states where there is no MSP, where the farmers have got no protection. And so that's the way to go. And I hope that's the way we will go. We need to halt the implementation of these bills. We need to put them on cold storage, think them out, take a year, take 2 years, call the National Development Council. Why has Mr. Modi not called a single NDC meeting in the last 7 years? And this is where I come to the fear part of it. My fear is that Mr. Modi has a personality in which he has never stepped back from any action he has taken, whether in Ahmedabad or today. He's never said, I'm sorry. He's never said, I may be wrong. He's never said, okay, let's think about this again. All he has done is to push and push and push to the absolute end of the road he has already chosen, regardless of the consequences, because his own personal ego is more important to him than what happens to the country. And I hope that the party will, in fact, come to its senses, will prevail upon Mr. Modi to just go back one step and say, okay, let's discuss each of these bills with the farmers' representatives, with the state governments. And we'll take a year doing it. A year is not a long time in the life of a nation.
One hopes that is the case, Mr. Jha. I agree with you. Circumvention of system, process, democracy never yields the best results for anyone. I really appreciate your time and your patience in answering my many questions today. Thank you so much for joining in.
To receive instant updates on all videos from The Wire, click the subscribe button and hit the bell icon. Pay to support independent journalism. Click the link in the description and choose the amount you want to pay.